Hello, my name is Father Anthony SooHoo. I teach at the Pontifical Biblical Institute, and today I'd like to share a little bit about the Ignatian presupposition. There's a story about a professor who went to visit a famous Zen master in order to learn more about Buddhism. The master welcomed his guest and invited the professor to share a little bit about himself. The professor described his work and research and told him what he knew about Zen, while the master quietly listened and served tea. The master filled his guest's cup with tea to the brim and then kept pouring. Watching the cup overflow and unable to restrain himself, the professor cried out, "It's full, no more will go in." To this the master replied, "This is you. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" Sometimes the greatest stumbling block to our relationships is our own ego. In the spiritual exercises, St. Ignatius offers us a practical suggestion on how we engage with other people when he recommends the following. It should be presupposed that every good Christian ought to be more eager to put a good interpretation on a neighbor's statement than to condemn it. Further, if one cannot interpret it favorably, one should ask how the other means it. If that meaning is wrong, one should correct the person with love. And if this is not enough, one should search out every appropriate means through which, by understanding the statement in a good way, it may be saved. We begin with a fundamental truth. Each of us is a child of God. Since each person is precious in God's eyes, no matter how different he or she may be, regardless of our past experiences that might influence our reaction, or what opinions or ideas he or she has, that individual deserves our respect and consideration. Our basic stance in our interactions is to presuppose the good in each other. Often that means letting go of our assumptions and not rushing to judgment based on first impressions. Moreover, St. Ignatius invites us to go deeper, to love more unconditionally, because we're to try our best to give the best possible interpretation regarding a person's words or actions before responding. This Ignatian presupposition encourages us to be open to others and to appreciate what they bring to the relationship. It also helps us to engage in more authentic listening and dialogue, especially when conversations involve matters that are dear to us. When we engage others, we begin with loving attentiveness and compassion, even if we might not experience that in return. Each of us has something to contribute, and none of us has a monopoly on the truth. In our encounters with others, we learn something about ourselves and about how to love unconditionally and to live in Christian community when we experience authenticity and foster mutual respect. This is an invitation to the Magus, moving us beyond just tolerating one another to recognizing and celebrating the different gifts and perspectives that each of us brings. In the words of Gerard Manley Hopkins, the famous Jesuit poet, it's acknowledging that the world in all its wonderful diversity is charged with the grandeur of God. Yet, the reality is that there are times when we disagree. In these uncomfortable moments, we need the Ignatian presupposition more than ever to help us navigate those conflicts by focusing on the Magus instead of our own egos and agendas. We're reminded of our common ground as God's children and the values rooted in the Gospels that we share, something that is more important than anything that can divide us. Authentic listening and mutual respect requires commitment and time. This takes time and effort and trust. The Ignatian presupposition helps us to practice and deepen the virtues of perseverance and patience. It also invites us to become more comfortable with our own human frailty and the messiness of relationships. In ancient Egypt and India, artisans would place roughly cut pieces of precious stone in troughs or goatskin bags filled with water or sand and other finely ground rocks. Then they would move the trough back and forth or roll the bags around day after day, often for months, until the precious stones were polished and became smooth. Life in Christian community is often like these early rock tumblers. In our encounters with others, especially the difficult ones, there's always the possibility of growth and something new and beautiful emerging if we allow ourselves to engage the process and not short-circuit it. Practicing the Ignatian presupposition doesn't mean compromising our beliefs, nor does it involve ignoring errors or mistakes. By giving each other the benefit of the doubt, we set off on a journey to seek the truth together. Understanding replaces judgment. We attempt to understand why a person might speak or act the way he or she does instead of reacting in a knee-jerk fashion. We learn to distinguish between abstract ideas and the real people who are before us. The Ignatian presupposition also involves self-reflection and honesty, because it means understanding why we might be feeling strongly, either negatively or positively, toward a person. Greater authenticity and self-awareness counters the temptation to justify and correct. It opens the door to mutuality and commitment. Life together as a Christian community is not about winning arguments, but learning to be church, the body and blood of Christ, broken and shared generously and selflessly for the good of the world. In his famous Confessions, St. Augustine praises God by saying, "You are good and all-powerful, caring for each one of us as though each of us is only one in your care." Some modern translators have reinterpreted his words with the memorable paraphrase, "God loves each of us as if there were only one of us." Both are reminders of God's unique and wonderful love for us as individuals and as a community of faith. The Ignatian presupposition calls us to that same unconditional love, not just in the moments when it's easy, but also when we're stretched and challenged to love. It's only one way we can seek the Magus in our daily lives. Here's some suggestions for prayer. Invite you to spend some time praying over your encounters and relationships, especially those with challenging people. As you reflect on a particular experience, recall what happened and sit with the feelings that were evoked by the encounter. Ask God for the grace of compassion so that you might better understand why that person acted the way he or she did. Furthermore, seek that same compassion for yourself as you try to understand your own reaction to that person. Afterwards, consider how you might have proceeded differently given this new perspective on the situation. Finally, end the reflection by praying for the person and thanking God for the growth that this relationship has brought into your life. If that's still too difficult, then just ask God to watch over the person in his or her struggles. As long as you find it fruitful, you might repeat this prayer exercise. It might also be helpful to speak with a spiritual director about the relationship and your ongoing experience of praying over it.
Where charity and love are found, there will the face of God be seen. The love of Christ will bind our hearts. As one body we will be. Love is patient, love is kind, never boastful, never proud. Love is hopeful in its waiting, ever trusting in God's light. Where charity and love are found, there will the face of God be seen. The love of Christ will bind our hearts. As one body we will be. Love is steadfast to the end, ever ready to endure. Love is gracious in its kindness, ever ready